What's going on? Welcome back to another episode of Performance Talk, and we have the great Bryson Sullivan with us again today. But Bryson, how you doing?
My dad always used to say one day at a time, and I felt like it was the corniest and most dad vibe thing that you can have. But I think there is wisdom in it. I think we are taking things one day at a time, and that's kind of what I've been trying to do. And it's worked out pretty well so far.
Right. My grandfather always told me you don't have a choice but a day at a time. So to try to do anything else is just crazy. To try to take more than that on is not going to happen. So make the most of that day instead of trying to rush that day is what he said. And I think you're right. Like we didn't take those quotes and that advice to it like fullest, but now we fully understand what they were talking about. So this is what I got for you, man. I know lately, hey, Tech Heads Podcast, how's it been going for you? You finally got that thing up and going and running. So how has that experience been for you, bro?
That's been a really interesting project because it's really passion based, right? It really is something that does take an extra amount of time. It takes time to book guests, organize guests, research segments. It takes time to record them and edit them. It's a pretty significant expenditure of energy. But what I'm finding is the more episodes we do, the more streamlined it becomes, the more attuned the listener base becomes to what we're actually doing, which is a tech-focused F1 podcast that is more about education on technical sides than necessarily politics or which driver is cute. Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Perfectly fine thing to do, but we usually don't cover that on on my podcast. Not that I'm qualified to say anything about it anyway. But no, I mean, I think it's been really good because I always looked at that podcast as an opportunity to document conversations, right? It's an opportunity to have conversations that we're not normally having to the depth that we'd like to be able to have and with people that we wouldn't normally get a chance to talk to, and then just to document them and share them with people who aren't able to have the privilege of being in the room. And
Right.
we just finished our 10th episode, was published yesterday, actually. And we were actually able to get the head of vehicle dynamics at McLaren F1 to actually come on our podcast and talk about vehicle dynamics, which is a pretty cool thing and kind of humbling. But it just goes to show that there are some interesting conversations to be had, and I hope I can have some more in the next year.
I'm loving that, man, and congratulations on that. I'm glad you got that thing up and running. The space needs it, and diversity is good, man. It's like Baskin Robbins out here. You get so many different flavors of styles, of genres of journalism or reporting or podcasting, and I love it, man. So let's hop into a topic that is bittersweet. And I'm going to ask you right off the bat. Do you feel like the penalty that the ABA, that Formula One came down with for Red Bull in the reduction of wind tunnel time and the financial fine is really going to be realized, or maybe it's not so much of a penalty at all?
I think it's a real penalty, but at the same time, I can imagine a world where it was actually a lot worse, right? So the question is, what is the intention of the FIA in this situation? Was there desire to put a hard line in the sand and say, this penalty is going to be so bad, no one would even dream of ever executing it ever again? Or was their goal to say, you're going to feel something from this, but we're not going to totally upset the order of things as a consequence of it? Now, depending on what they want to do, you could say they achieved the second objective if that's what they wanted to do. Regardless of the circumstances, and regardless of how the bookkeeping is done, if you overspend more than any other team, you can argue on paper it was just catering, it was just the electricity bills or something. You can stack however many layers, the layers which comprise your budget over the course of the season, you can stack in any which way you want. You can put those catering layers at the bottom, and what's left over is R&D work, right? So at the end of the day, more money was spent on R&D and car development that really shouldn't have been there. And there are questions about, how much was actually overspent. Is it $2 million? Is it less than 400,000 because of tax breaks, et cetera, et cetera? Right. The bottom line is it just wasn't done correctly. Red Bull had an opportunity in 2021 to do a dry run of this process to get a feel for what their accounting was in relation to what the FAA said it was going to be. And they were the only team to break it. So the only team to break the cost cap was also the constructors and drivers champion under questionable circumstances, obviously,
Oh,
over the last 2 years, right? So there's a there's a continual line. There's continuity of problematic situations with Red Bull in not being able to have a championship, either drivers or constructors, that's not overshadowed by something weird. And of course, that's going to carry over in 2022 because the extra resources that you spend in 2021, part of that was preparing for this 2022 car. Their 2022 car was a bit overweight at the beginning of the season, but it turned out to be a really excellent car. And that's just a head start. It's going to carry on for quite some time. Mercedes definitely has the ability to catch them, but they're fighting an uphill battle for sure.
true, true. I don't know how I feel about the whole process. That I think the process definitely needs to be worked on. I think it needs to be better. I was a little bit I lost a little bit of faith, not even faith, just it didn't really seem like a penalty to me. It's a penalty. It just didn't seem like the penalty would have translated what they initially said if you were to break the cost cap, in my opinion, regardless of the team that's in there. I think that the process that went on and then the reduction of this and reduction of that and then kind of how do you feel about this, I think they could have been a little bit firmer to let other teams know that we're not going to play any games about this, but we will hear you out in the future as far as maybe there are some things that we need to expand or open up a bit more due to the economy and situation. But if this is the number, we damn well mean you need to stay within the confines of that number to compete within that season. So I think they probably should have done a little bit more if they were going to do that. So, like, I think it's a slippery slope at this point in time.
Yeah, just a brief comment on that. I mean, first of all, we're talking about having faith in the FIA and FOM.
Facts. That's why I changed that.
Don't do that. Don't do that. That's a bad starting point for your analysis. Just start at a different point. I think my issues with the FIA and FOM are well documented. But the tragedy, of course, is that we need these companies. We need these people to be able to run the races safely. We rely on them to organize the races and to run them. We need to be able to trust them. But they're not in a position of trust right now. Is the first thing I would say. And the second thing I would say is there are obviously some comments made about Ross Brawn back in 2019 about what would happen to a team if they broke the cost cap. But to be clear, when people say what would happen if you broke the cost cap, we're really paraphrasing what he said. What he actually said was, if you fraudulently present your finances to the FIA, you will be losing your championship. And I think the only possible escape valve that someone might try to come up with for Red Bull's situation is that they weren't fraudulent in their reporting. Mm-hmm. They weren't doing a Trumpian-esque cooking of books to keep things topical. They weren't doing an egregious, horrifically misrepresented situation of their finances. They were accurately reporting what they were doing. It's just that what they were doing wasn't enough. It wasn't saving enough. And I think there is a little bit of daylight there between a team or organization that is deliberately misrepresenting what their finances are versus one that is trying to be transparent, trying to be open, but what they actually presented is not satisfactory. And that's kind of where there might be some difference in what the penalty would be.
Yeah, do you see some gray area in there, like maybe like if you say what they were trying to do, like how can we really know they weren't trying to but just not found that, oh, it's fraudulent? But like it is in court, if you can't prove it, it doesn't exist. So I will agree with that, right? If you can't prove it, it doesn't exist. But nobody really knows if they were like cooking the books, like put this money here, put that money there, which would be fraudulent, right? That is a misrepresentation of where the money actually went into. And we know 1,000 pounds of chicken wings didn't result in the RBA team being as fast as it was this season. I'm just
maybe it was good chicken. I don't know. it was that good stuff. It was fed directly to the car. No, but no, I'm not an accountant and I'm not a lawyer. Right. I'm not able to parse the fine details of what is intent and what is not. All I'm trying to give is an outline of the landscape. What are the relevant factors what are the relevant questions that are going to be asked when ascertaining that?
Right. Okay. So I'll tell you what. Let's move into another topic that is definitely like I really like it. I like what's going on because it leaves a bit of mystery coming into 2023. So I want to know, what team do you think has the best new driver pairing? All right, excluding Russell, and Hamilton. Excluding those two, what team do you think now has the best driver or most, let's say, which one do you think has the most potential? Which driver pairing going into 2023 does Bryson think has the most potential?
I mean, of all the new driver pairings, almost all of them are going to involve someone who is a rookie coming in, being paired with someone who's been there. The only team that I think doesn't. Well, yeah, and Aston is a slightly different thing. You know, we're talking about that, but I'm specifically saying of the groups that are having a new team pairing, and we're not talking about Alonso because he's like a legacy driver.
Right.
The other team that is having two drivers that are experienced racing together is actually Alpine, and it is Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly. You know, this is now the French super team. You know, I French drivers, right. French team, you know, I expect them to be speaking French the entire time, to be reminded to be speaking English. I want to hear, you know, music in the background, and I want to have people, you know, eating baguettes and stuff. I want to be French. Like, I want to be, they lost the circuit of Paul Ricard, so I want them to be able to do stuff. But no, I mean, I think Esteban Ocon is, he's a very friendly guy. He's a very nice guy to hang around, but he's very sharp-edged on the track. He is not afraid to get his elbows out against more established drivers. He certainly did it with Sergio Perez. He absolutely did it with Fernando Alonso. And if you pair him with Pierre Gasly, someone who's shown flashes of brilliance in AlphaTauri and then before that Toro Rosso, in a different machinery, I think that actually could be a very strong pairing. To a degree, many of the other groups are unknown quantities. Oscar Piastri going to McLaren with Lando Norris. Oscar Piastri is obviously very highly rated. Lando Norris will be a good benchmark because he effectively ended Daniel Ricciardo's career, at least in the short term. Then we also have Logan Sargent going to Williams. You know, Logan did very well in Formula 2, but he didn't win it. He wasn't the Formula 2 champion. No. Many people who were the champions of Formula 2 from previous years got into F1 immediately. Now, that didn't quite happen for Nick de Vries. He had to go somewhere else and then come back. But fundamentally, he's also an unknown quantity, Logan Sargent. It is good to see a more American representation in F1, which I'm very happy to see. Right. There are some secondary questions that are going to have to be asked about things that are off the track. We can talk about it at your leisure, but the representation is there in one form or another. But that's an interesting pairing. And then Nick de Vries, as I mentioned before, going to AlphaTauri and being paired with Yuki Tsunoda. You know, Yuki, it was very strange. Helmut Marko is well documented as not being my favorite person in the paddock. That's what's well known. But what he said was quite interesting. He said that when Nick de Vries was going to go to AlphaTauri, he was going to be the number one driver, and not Yuki Tsunoda, who's been at that team for 2 years in Formula One racing. And I thought to myself, is he serious right now? Like, I understand that Helmut Marko is old school, right? When Sergio Perez didn't get a pole or didn't win a race, he accused him of drinking too much tequila the night before. Stuff like that. Stuff that's just out of pocket, right?
Right.
And him saying that Yuki Tsunoda would not be the team leader at AlphaTauri seems out of pocket to me. I think that it's possible for Yuki to be a leader in the team, but who knows how it's going to evolve. There's a lot of factors involved in that. And then, of course, you mentioned Fernando going to Aston Martin. There's a very complex dynamic there. And we can talk about some of the secondary things towards the end of the show. But the first thing I would say about that is, let's not forget why Fernando's left Alpine. Fernando ostensibly went to Alpine to build that team up, to become race winners, and to build an enterprise sort of from the ground up into fighting form. And then he just left after 2 seasons. And money was a part of it. Mm-hmm. Alpine's unwillingness to give Fernando what he wanted, both in terms of monetary value and in terms of length. They wouldn't give it to him. But also his the friction in his relationship with Ocon cannot be ignored in this. And this is what I'm trying to sort of convey, is that Esteban is a very nice guy, he's a very smiley fellow, but he can have complex relationships with his teammates, and I think that is part of the reason why Fernando left. ultimately is because of the way that he was treated by Ocon, which is probably just fair in my mind.
Right.
That's not. But Fernando, that's not what he's looking for. He is the number one driver. He is the nano. He's supposed to be the guy, and he wanted to go somewhere where he was treated like that. And for what it's worth, I can understand, I suppose.
Yeah, I can understand that. I definitely I definitely got no sympathy for Alonso when it comes to some of that treatment. With it means, like, we're not talking about like just outright degrading or something like that. But when it comes to what Ocon was giving him, I got no problem with that. And I think I think he's more aggressive on track than he is as an actual individual, like in person, like he is. And I don't mind that dynamic of a driver to have that type of character, to be a killer on track, like metaphorically speaking, and to be a person of character in the paddock and outside of the track. I think that's a better combination for me than to meet some asshole both on the track and off the track. I'm not going to say what else rhymes with that, but, hey, people out here right now like that, you know what I'm saying? So I think that's okay. I don't know how far Ocon's his ceiling to me is starting to be more visible. Like I don't, I had the hopes that I thought he could keep going. It just doesn't seem like Ocon is progressing enough through the seasons to the point where now I'm starting to see his ceiling coming where it's going to be cemented. Like, that is pretty much the driver that he will aspire to be. That's it. That's the level that he's going to reach. And it's almost like, to me, just a tad above journeyman level, right? Like, he's not Latifi, he's not that, but he's just going to be stuck mid-tier. I don't see any high-ranking teams looking at Ocon like, we want to bring him up type situation.
I think if Ocon was a sort of once-in-a-lifetime generational talent, he would have been able to really fight and beat Fernando on merit. Now, he probably did beat him in the points this season just because Fernando had so many retirements and things. But to be clear, he didn't do to Fernando what Lewis Hamilton did to Fernando.
Facts.
Right? And there's an opportunity for him to do that. He was very competitive with Fernando, and that was a very positive experience for him. But I agree. I don't think he's an elite driver. He's definitely a very good driver, and I think the pairing of him and Pierre Gasly could be very powerful.
Yeah. So why do you think he was campaigning for Mick? Because initially, before we got the Gasly announcement, we heard, Ocon was campaigning for Mick. Why do you think, if anything, why he would have been campaigning for that?
The Mick Schumacher situation is very complex. If Esteban Ocon is a nice guy, Mick Schumacher is also a really nice guy. It's like the same delta in the same direction, like that same vector. But again, they're really especially nice, especially good and everything. But on average, not quick enough compared to Kevin Magnussen, and certainly not consistent enough when it comes to keeping the car on the black stuff. Too many crashes, and they were too costly. Yeah. And I think the paddock kind of see that. Obviously, he had kind of a phantom partner in his team with Nikita Mazepin there. He was a teammate, but he wasn't really a teammate. He didn't really have to do that much to beat Nikita Mazepin. And then K-Mag comes in. He comes in out of nowhere. He's parachuted into the team last minute, and suddenly Mick's entire world is kind of thrown on its head. He was the number one driver, and the season starts, and he's beaten right away in the first race. The first big result that Haas gets in Bahrain is Kevin Magnussen. It was not Mick Schumacher.
Right.
And he was certainly grabbing it back a little bit towards the end of the season, but that was already when he knew he was going to be leaving. And drivers often produce incredible results when they're right at the end of their time leaving. Right. Sebastian Vettel did it. It's a common thing, but he was still crashing. Mick was still crashing. That one in Japan really hurt him a lot. To answer your question, I believe that Ocon wanted Mick Schumacher because he believes he could beat him. Mm-hmm. I believe that he wanted a situation that would be harmonious to him and would not be quite as bristly as the interactions with Fernando. Mm-hmm. Mick's a nice guy, but also I think on a competitive level, Esteban would have favored potentially a weaker teammate, as many drivers do, to be clear. It's actually rare. Even multiple world champions oftentimes are looking for a driver that is like not just slightly worse than them, but like considerably worse than them so that they can focus on some things. But I don't think Mercedes ever really did that. I think just that the level that Lewis is at, especially at the highest levels of his game, peak of his powers, were just very difficult to match by anybody. So I think that's definitely a big thing to look at. But yeah, fundamentally, I think that Esteban Ocon wanted Mick Schumacher because he was a more conducive teammate to what he was trying to do. And right. I think he'll still get along great with Pierre Gasly, but it'll be a very different dynamic.
Okay, I agree with that. I think, by far, I think Pierre's going to give him more competition than Schumacher would. I hope maybe Mick can do something. But I always tell people this. Like, I think he gets judged unfairly because of the name. And he also has benefited from that name, too. So I'm not going to ignore that at all. But I just ask people sometimes, look at superstars, whether it's in basketball, football, soccer, baseball, Ken Griffey, like Peyton, any of these guys are women, and you look at their offspring like they are automatically supposed to be as great as their parents were. Well, how many people were great as their parents were? It's like an unfair comparison to do that. And like I say, he benefited from the name, and he also, I think, was overly criticized because of the name. But if you move all that, Mick just hasn't done enough to me to I would like to see him get another opportunity, of course, because I don't want to see anybody's career ended. But I just don't think he's done enough. I think he definitely needs to go somewhere else, do something, and kind of hopefully he can, build himself up and maybe come back and lead a better Formula One career.
Well, but to be clear, I know this is an unplanned.
Ralph out, right? Ralph's career, he probably didn't even top that.
I know that this was an unplanned move for him. I'm not going to call this failing upwards. I'm going to call this failing sideways. Okay. I believe that. So first of all, we know that Mick Schumacher's characteristic is that sometimes he takes a little bit of time to adapt to new machinery, to really get a feel for it. He won the Formula 2 championship in the second year, but in the first year he was like not really that great. Now, to be clear, many other people don't get a second chance because they don't have the name Schumacher. True. So that we can't ignore that fact. But if that's in fact the case, then it suggests that he has more in the tank. He just needs to find a way to deliver it. If he puts himself in a situation where he has the reserve role at Mercedes, which this isn't confirmed yet, but
right,
Toto Wolff and the rest of the team have been very open to having the Schumacher name come back to Mercedes. If he decides to go there as a reserve driver, he would essentially be first in line for any spot opportunities where one of the regular drivers isn't available. Right. Or if Lewis retires or something else happens, then he will actually get one of the most competitive seats in Formula One. In fact, over the last decade, it has been the best seat in Formula One at Mercedes. So even though this is an unplanned stay of activity in terms of being a racing driver, it could be the indirect path to exactly where he wants to be. Just it wasn't really planned.
Could be. And talking about, matter of fact, we could segue perfectly from that as a reserve driver. How do you feel about Daniel's role, now a new assumed role at Red Bull, and his potential Formula One career going forward? Do you feel that there is an honest opportunity for Daniel at Red Bull? I don't get that, but I'd like to know how you feel about it. Or do you feel more of a dog and pony show for Red Bull in lieu of all the bad PR that technically their championship driver brings them, and the situations that now exist between Perez and Max? How do you feel about that? And then how do you feel about Daniel's Formula One career going forward? Two-part.
I mean, to be clear about Daniel and his rather unusual agreement with Red Bull, he's not their primary reserve driver. He's actually only going to be reserve driver for 6 races of the season.
Part-time.
Otherwise, he'll be doing demos and doing burnouts in LA or something for them, whatever they want. And I view that as a mutually beneficial interaction because Daniel has said specifically that he wants to take one step back from being in the paddock to try to analyze, deconstruct what was allowed to happen to him at McLaren.
Right.
He was signed at McLaren for a 3-year deal, assuming he was going to be the number one driver, paid tons of money, and he was embarrassed in the car. Embarrassed. And I try to tell people that this is not just a question of how good a driver is. The driver and the car work together. And some drivers are better at adapting their own driving style to a car than others. Some are not. Drivers can be very, very fast. Being fast is not this inherent platonic concept that applies to every possible situation. Some drivers are just extremely fast in extreme specific type of cars. Right. Sebastian Vettel was like that with the exhaust blown diffusers. Daniel Ricciardo could have been like that as well with Red Bull. So I think there's still the wild card possibility that Daniel could be a very fast driver in a car that has a different inherent balance. Okay. Aerodynamic balance, weight distribution, characteristics on under braking, all of these things could benefit him that he would not have the opportunity to get at McLaren. So I do think he wants to keep the door open to any kind of opportunity at Red Bull just to see, just to actually see if he has more in the tank for him. Now, to be clear about Red Bull, as you were saying this, as you said, dog and pony show, yes. Something to outline the very public, previously private things that were going on at Red Bull, perhaps even using Daniel as an implicit threat to Sergio Perez, saying, if you don't, toe the party line, we'll replace you. That seems to me like a very dangerous strategy for Red Bull.
Right.
Because Sergio Perez is deeply embedded in that team. He is deeply involved in the activities of that team, not just now, but last year as well. Not only was there a fundamental reliance on him to get Max where he needed to be to even have a shot for fighting for the championship in 2021, but he knows where the metaphorical bodies are buried, so to speak.
Right.
And if Red Bull wants to play that game of this person not doing what they want, and they choose to cast him out, they could very easily find themselves in a Renault 2008
Renault situation.
Renault 2008
when they
Nelson Piquet Jr. situation.
Yeah.
And the only reason we even know about Crashgate, the only reason we have conclusive evidence that it was provably a race-fixing incident was because of testimony. Right. It wasn't because of analyzing data traces. Nope. It wasn't because of looking at video, even though we love doing it. And even though we have, friends that do it very, very expertly, as a matter of fact, ultimately, what blew that case out of the water was testimony.
Right.
And I believe that Red Bull may perceive themselves to be in a position of strength by trying to use Daniel Ricciardo as an implicit threat to Sergio Perez. But not only do I think that it could backfire, I believe it's guaranteed to backfire if they release Sergio Perez under those circumstances. So that's my take.
I completely agree with that. I think that is dangerous. Do you foresee, if Daniel takes a step back, do you see his Formula One? Because Bryson, I'm thinking that, I'm not gonna lie, bro. I'm thinking Daniel's done. Like, even if it is a path back, it's not right initially back in the Formula One. I kind of almost think he's done. Like, I said the same thing about Seb, like toward the beginning of the season when I saw and heard things he was saying. I was like, man, this dude's gonna probably end up retiring at the end of the season by next season. I just feel like that, not the same music, maybe not the same lyrics, but the same genre of energy is coming from Daniel. And I'm not sure Daniel's Formula One career going forward, even as he says 2024 coming back with a rage of fire, I'm not sure if that really exists.
Normally, I would agree with you. But the apparent evidence that is possible is Kevin Magnussen this season, and especially Nico Hülkenberg next season. Nico Hülkenberg has been out for 3 years?
Yeah.
Gone. Completely out.
Yeah, every time he shows up, he kind of, does his thing and he goes on another hiatus.
he was doing this super sub thing for a couple of years in the COVID years. But ultimately, the seat that Nico Hülkenberg is taking at Haas was, in principle, offered to Daniel Ricciardo. True. And he declined it because that was not the option that he wanted. As I mentioned, it's not just the stature of the team. Could be or cannot be what he wants, but also, I mentioned he wants to do a little bit of self-reflection. He wants to take a step back. So the seat that Nico Hülkenberg has for next season at Haas, who's to say that a similar situation won't happen in 2024 with another driver who you think should be in a seat like a Haas, but just chooses not to. And then suddenly here comes Daniel Ricciardo saying, I'm ready to go. Yeah, exactly. And again, I don't think Sergio should be released from Red Bull. And I also don't think he will retire. I've said this multiple times and I believe it. Sergio Perez is actually the best thing that's happened to Red Bull for their team, in years.
I agree.
He is one of the best decisions they've ever made, and it was almost an accident because previously Red Bull had great machinery, a good number one driver, but they had two young drivers all the time, Max and Gasly, Max and Albon. And Kvyat was there before, and then there's other things involved as well. But Sergio Perez brings experience and a grittiness and acumen the other drivers don't necessarily have, not for lack of ability, but just Checo's been driving since forever. And he gives that team a different dimension that they didn't have before. So if Red Bull is smart, they will not let Checo leave, and they won't fire him.
I agree. Right, I agree, and I've said that was one of the best moves. Like that was a very superior move by Red Bull to acquire Perez. Like I firmly believe that. Like you said, he is an awesome component for that team. And I do see, like, I can understand like the Haas and the Williams situation and Daniel possibly getting an opportunity to come back there. Because like I said, he's not the worst driver on the grid by any means necessary. Like he's not that. So it's just mentally where he wants to be, and is he fully invested himself into competing into the sport. I don't question Daniel's ability to be the driver that I've seen him be. I still think he has enough in the tank to be that, maybe even a bit more competitive given the right situation and the right development and the right team grooming, which is why I really don't think he should have left Alpine, but things happened and he got the bag. But Daniel also has said that he's glad a bigger team didn't approach him, because it almost would have put him in a situation where he would have had to accept it. And I think that is firmly just money. Like they put that bag in front of you. You only got so many opportunities you're gonna get it. You're gonna take it. But
well, not just that, but he got the bag twice. He got the bag at Alpine going there, right. And then he got the bag because he got a severance of his contract at McLaren.
Right.
So he's got
bags.
He's got a few, but yeah,
he got some brags, bro. He's definitely getting some bags up. So let's get to one of the teams that the team I feel made a considerable amount of progress in 2022. Definitely started out in the shit box. Made progress throughout. Definitely Lewis paid some heavy dividends in trying to do and help for the car development. What do you see going forward next season for not only car development for Mercedes, but the potential contract for Lewis? And if so, what do you see that line being, that horizon being for Lewis? But first, the car development. Do you even expect the W14 or whatever they're going to call it to be in the similar or even same form as this season? And if not, what do you think will happen?
Mercedes absolutely started the season on the back foot. And it was so much of the case that not only did they have a major problem that they had identified right away, they're saying, hey, this porpoising problem is an issue, it's holding us back in terms of performance. Not only did they have that problem, but they remedied that to a great degree in Spain. Mm-hmm. And then they got to Baku the week later, or 2 weeks later, and realized they had a totally separate problem, this bouncing problem and bottoming problem, that was actually totally distinct from the porpoising problem that was also costing them performance, and potentially Lewis Hamilton is back. Right. And this is one of those things where I think Mike Elliott described it as they were just peeling back layers of an onion. They just kept going and kept going. And every time they pulled something back, there was something else. And there was so many things that they had no idea about. And these are all symptoms of to use an inelegant term, an undercooked concept. Okay. Right. There was a very ambitious idea about how to attack the 2022 regulations. There was limited resources. In fact, the most limited resources of any team, because they won the 2021 Constructors' Championship. They had less CFD items, less wind tunnel man hours available to develop an already ambitious concept. You could argue one of the things they could have done would have been to just back off a little bit on the ambition of the design concept, precisely because you don't have extra resources. You don't even have resources that are on a par with everyone else. You actually have less resources than everyone else. So it's two things happening together. You have less resources than everyone else, and your concept is arguably more ambitious than anyone else. I would argue that it was. And they almost made it work. Right? They almost made it work. But the important thing is, as you said, they developed that car so much over the course of the season, and there are certain aspects of the design that are immutable, that can't be changed, and they were still able to work around those and still build performance. What was impressive to me about that is Ferrari was winning races right out of the box. Right out of the box, they were competitive with Red Bull. But as the season went on, it wasn't just driver errors. It wasn't just reliability. It wasn't just poor strategy calls that was throwing away wins for them.
Right.
Towards the second half of the season, they were actually lacking race pace. They had great qualifying pace. They were always there in qualifying. But they didn't have the race pace. But Mercedes actually did, on average. I mean, Abu Dhabi is a little bit an outlier towards the end of the season, but on average, on the second half of the season, the team that was actually fighting Red Bull wasn't Ferrari. It was Mercedes. And we know that the Red Bull car had gotten faster over the course of the season.
Right.
It was overweight. It was probably the most overweight car of any car on day one of the season. And they were finally getting down towards the weight limit towards the end of the season. And that combined with whatever effects of technical directive 39 and the aerodynamic oscillation metric, the AOM metric to try to stop the porpoising, those things together just made Red Bull incredibly fast and Ferrari not nearly as fast.
No.
And the only team that was actually able to take it to Red Bull towards the end of the season was Mercedes. So I would argue that Mercedes being able to fight a latter half of the season Red Bull is actually more impressive than a Ferrari that could fight an early half of the season Red Bull. Because that second half of the season Red Bull is way faster.
Yeah, good point.
It's way faster. So I think that not only is Mercedes in a situation where they have the absolute pace to be able to compete, but the level that they were competing at is actually represents a faster car than what Ferrari started the season at. And I don't want to say that Ferrari flattered to deceive, so to speak, but part of Ferrari's competitiveness owes to Red Bull itself and them struggling to get on their own feet. As I said before, car was overweight. They had reliability problems in the first couple of races, and then they really started to come together towards the latter half. So in terms of car development, yes, Mercedes is probably going to be in a very strong place. Not only did they learn critical information about the design direction of the new car, but equally important, if not more important, they learned how to find that information. They learned how to find information when they are totally lost.
Right.
And they've never been more lost in the last 10 years than they were now. Even when they weren't winning.
Right.
Even when they weren't winning in 2010 and in 2011 or whatever, I think they still had a better feel for what was going on than just being totally flabbergasted at the beginning of the season. So Mercedes is an incredibly strong team. There's a reason why they're 8 times champions and all the rest, and I think they'll come back strong, whatever they decide to do. With respect to Lewis is an interesting character. We look at Fernando, we look at Sebastian. We saw Sebastian in the latter half of his career towards the end. Maybe the reflexes weren't quite as sharp. Maybe the wheel-to-wheel wasn't as great. We asked questions about, does he still have the ultimate pace? No one's really asking those questions about Lewis, even though he started before Seb did. Only a few races to clear it, yeah. But Lewis, by all means, should already be deep into his decline by age, right?
Right.
He's not a spring chicken anymore.
Right.
Lewis is a little bit long in the tooth in terms of drivers. Many other drivers who were younger than him lost their competitiveness faster than him. He is still, as an elder statesman of Formula One, able to go wheel to wheel with the youngest, fastest guys on the grid, Verstappen among them. So Lewis is, and I said this before, and I want to be clear, I'm saying this as affectionately and respectfully as I can. But Lewis Hamilton's a freak. Okay? Lewis Hamilton's a freak.
Right.
He's a freak not in the sense of some sort of deviant, but
in nature,
his existence is singular.
Yes.
There is not something that preceded it that would explain why he is as good as he is. And I doubt that anyone will come after him that will have the same type of impact that he had or have the same type of profile as a driver. I mean, he's a beast.
Right.
And it's almost inexplicable what his abilities actually are. And I think one of the things that people are sort of, thinking about and who's the next big driver, and Verstappen was given a championship once and he actually won a championship a second time. Does that make him better than Lewis Hamilton? Like, not really.
No.
I mean, when you get to 5 championships, we can start talking, first of all. But secondly, there's a huge age disparity there. Verstappen, by all rights, should have much better reflexes and much better, everything. But Lewis can still go toe to toe with him.
True.
And which is incredibly impressive. So I say all of this as preface to give my explanation for what I think Lewis is going to do. I think he's going to buck the trends of what a driver is capable of. He is here in Formula One not because he wants the money, not even necessarily because he wants an 8th championship or anything else. To come back to this sport after what it did to him in Abu Dhabi 21, to come back from that is a labor of love. He loves driving, he loves racing, and he's doing it because he loves it. Right. And so I think that motivation is perennial to a degree. It will last for a long time.
Right.
And I don't see any immediate reason why it would stop. It's not like he's racing and then this is distracting him from his social activities or his movies going or whatever. He's doing all that too. Right. he never stopped doing that.
None of that.
So it's not like he is sacrificing some second or third life because he's racing. He's already doing both of these things. So that's also not something that's weighing on him in terms of shortening his career. I also know that this is a deeper point. The one thing that Lewis Hamilton fears the most in many situations is he does not want to leave Formula One and be known as the only black driver in Formula One.
Right.
That is something that he deeply does not want to happen. And if his position and his perception is that by staying in the sport longer, by providing other people with opportunities, by supporting them, he can help bridge that gap, that's also a reason to stay beyond all the other reasons we've already discussed. So I don't know what he's going to do, but I think that he has it in him to race for many more years than people are giving him credit for.
I believe that too. I'm like you said, freak of nature. Y'all take it an anomaly, just like any other great that comes and just really impacts a sport historically. We're not talking about just in one era or a few seasons. We're talking about historical impact. Lewis is that in Formula One. And when you have that, people have to understand there are going to be some different things that come with that, like LeBron James. Like, to compete at that level for this long, this many seasons, I know people want to look and say, oh, but he's not winning championships. Look at his numbers. Look at his stats. Look at where he's still competing. Look at how at a high level that's not happening. You can go back even from Jordan. Even if you go to the GOAT Jordan wasn't competing like that well beyond that time frame. All right. That's just, we look at Tom Brady. Look at how many seasons he's been in, how many championships he's got, what he's still doing. Lewis Hamilton is that to Formula One. And you can't apply the natural laws to those type of individuals. They thought Brady was going to be gone seasons ago. He's still here. They thought LeBron should be resigned. He's still going to be here. So those things do happen. And I think what I do say is you still cannot miss. I know people sometimes say, well, Lewis has the ability to go this long because physically he's not getting tackled or he's not getting elbowed. People, the G-forces of a Formula One car are literally beating your ass around that track.
Every time, every single race. People don't realize this. What's so funny about this is two parts to this. I'll be quick. I know you got other questions. First of all, you see these insane torture devices that the drivers put their heads in to try to train for testing or
right.
for the season to start. Incredible, 60 kilogram load on their neck sideways, and they're just beasting it just doing it easy right. Because they have a baseline strength. But the problem is even that is not enough to prepare them properly for the season.
Correct.
The only way to really get started and train your neck through the G-forces is to race. You remember Carlos Sainz had a problem the couple races before Miami. He retired from Imola. He retired from some other races prior to that. And he was saying that he was having problems with his fitness level just because he wasn't completing full Grand Prix distances on a regular basis for like physical training purposes. So he was relieved to be able to finish a full race in Miami because it got him to the fitness level that he needed. So please make no mistake, people who don't understand motorsports. These are the most insane cars that exist. And in fact, you really can't appreciate how extraordinary they are unless you're standing next to them in some of the most extreme environments, which I've had the pleasure to do 3 times this year, fortunately, or B, when you see them crash. And when you see them crash, you get a much better understanding of how much energy is actually in play here and how much distance and space is required to dissipate it in a sometimes violent way. So please, people who don't understand anything, don't say that he's not getting beat up. He is getting beat up constantly. This is one of the reasons why the seat fit is so critical.
True.
And it's actually one of the reasons why women have had barriers to entry in advanced motorsport categories is because you're pulling all these G's and because the fit has to be perfect, because any pressure point is going to be amplified by a factor of 6 or 7 instantaneously. That when you have the seat that's not perfectly fit, or even if your race suit doesn't fit your body correctly, that puts pressure points on you that you wouldn't normally be able to do. So if the cockpit dimensions aren't conducive to a woman's form and there's like pressure points in somewhere, that's distracting for them when they're trying to drive. And so I think one of the things that the FAA is trying to do in the new series that they started for some of the women drivers is to just give them, do what they can to make the series equally viable for women and men, because there are physical differences. So.
Right. I would challenge some people. Like, I've done it. I'm working on 2 karts now. One is a surprise for my daughter, more like Formula One style kind of gimmick kart, but then another kart for myself to train her. But I've kart raced before, and I'm telling people, like, go, if you've never kart raced, I'm not talking about going to K1 speeds. I'm not talking, go to a literal track that has kart racing set up, and those seats are not set for you. So they still have to kind of keep a generic seat and size. Go there and do 50 to 60 laps, and then tell me how you feel the next day. Tell me how
I'll tell you
how 60 to 70 mile an hour or better. You go. Tell me how you feel the next day.
I'll give you a quick engineering reason why going to K1 is not sufficient enough. It actually has to do with coefficient of friction, and it has to do with the relationship between speed and acceleration. So essentially, you go to a K1 speed, you have karts, nice electric karts, nice grippy rubber, but you're basically running on concrete. Right? Concrete is just like unfinished. It's porous and it's got all kinds of things. It's not a good surface to get a lot of grip. You go to an outdoor track. You go to Orlando Karting Complex in Florida. You go to Atlanta Motorsports Park.
There you go.
You know, AMP. You go to Kart Circuit Autobahn in Illinois, which is closer to where I am. And you have tarmac, really. You have proper asphalt and better grippy tires. You can generate more G-forces because the tire grip capability is higher. Not only that, but the cars are going faster. The karts are going faster because the circuit is faster. You have more time to accelerate. You can brake harder. The forces you're being exposed to are just fundamentally different in an outdoor setting than they are for an indoor setting. So yes, I love racing K1 speed. It's a lot of fun. I did it for a long time. But as soon as I had an opportunity to kart outside, it was like, oh, I'm just going to do this now. Yeah, this is going to be big. This is going to be what I do.
Big difference. I'm doing a seat fit now. I'm like, yo, I already know. Like, if it's too much space left and right, your hips, you're going to feel it. You're going to feel it.
Hey, if you want to go racing sometime, I'll bring my suit. I'll bring it somewhere. I got. Yeah.
We could definitely do that. That'll be on point. So let's get into this. Let's go ahead and let's transition as we start coming down to the end here. Alonso going to Aston Martin. I've often said I don't know what Alonso's going to bring that Seb couldn't bring for them. All right. So what do you feel Alonso's going to bring to Aston Martin that Seb didn't already bring? And even if that's the case, I've said that Aston Martin's development didn't yield enough for Seb to even be fully utilized with all of his experience and his potential and his talent. So what do you think is going to happen next season?
The most dangerous thing about Aston Martin is there is a boardroom somewhere in the UK with the Aston Martin, and you have the shareholders looking at the numbers and seeing how they want to be successful in Formula One, and they just see this thing, 4-time world champion, 2-time world champion, they'll say that has a ring to it when I say it to the investors.
Right.
We're getting a 4-time world champion in our team, in our car. We're getting a 2-time world champion in our car. This is going to be great for us. This is going to be awesome. That is the primary factor, I believe, in why they sought Vettel so aggressively and why they went after Alonso as well. I can actually imagine others that might be a better fit for that team, especially with the dynamic between Lance Stroll and his father, Lawrence Stroll. Mm-hmm. But the business side of it, the optics of having a 2-time world champion or a 4-time world champion in the team override everything else, regardless of whatever the dynamics are going to be inside the team. Now, Fernando has expectations about what he's going to be given, and he has demonstrated time after time that if he does not like what he's being given or find something unpalatable in a generic sense, he will walk. He will do it, without warning, and he'll do it, repeatedly. It's one of the things he's known for is leaving teams. So that is a potential recipe for disaster, but think of whatever you want about Fernando's history and background and all of the things that surround him. He's a very good driver. He is a good driver. And he, almost like Lewis to a degree, is also better than he probably should be by rights in terms of his age. He is still very good. And if there is pace in the car, I do think he'll be able to extract it. And I do think he'll be able to work with engineers, assuming they're all on the same page.
Right.
But to be honest, the thing that has been happening in recent weeks with Fernando's transition to Aston Martin actually isn't even about him. There's been a troubling trend of things happening with a large Spanish fan base that is passionate about Fernando Alonso, and with the news that he is going to Aston Martin, their focus has been directed towards Aston Martin, and things that they don't like. If people, we know that there are fans in the world that are racist and they're xenophobic and homophobic. That certainly is not all of Fernando's fans. That's not how it is. But there's no question that there are some of these people out there, and I've met them, I've talked to them, and the thing is that they're going to Aston Martin now. It's hard to even imagine a bigger 180 going from Sebastian Vettel's fan base to Fernando Alonso's fan base. But to be clear, the reason why I'm even bringing this up is not to talk trash about Fernando. I don't care. What concerns me is what happened with Matt Bishop recently.
Correct.
Matt is an out man in motorsports. He's a gay man, been in the motorsports paddock for 25 years. Excellent contributor, excellent person in the community, and he was targeted with so much harassment, with so much vile treatment on Twitter in the last couple of weeks that he left Twitter.
And that's
he just left. And if you look at the people who were doing this to him, they were, Alonso's fans. Whether it's pretty to say or not, that's who they are. And it really looked to me from the outside as them marking their territory, so to speak, in one way or another. And it's just it's a shame. It's a shame that people who are so highly integrated into the motorsports community and the F1 community can be made to feel so unwelcome that they would just leave a social media platform. All of this Races One stuff is irrelevant if there's no action behind it. So I hope that situation doesn't continue. I hope that something happens to change the status quo, but it's a very real world example of theoretical things that are happening in the background. I just wish it didn't have to unfold the way it's been doing so far.
Right. And Bryce, you bring a very good point, and it is indeed disgusting. And I'm going to also say this. I'm going to straight out say, Bryson already said it, but I'm going to re-elaborate on it. We're not saying that all these people, it's not like Alonso's making calls saying to do this. We're not saying that everybody is directly tied to Alonso, but it is it's very interesting that now it's taking place, that the official handover from Alonso, from Alpine to Aston, this is happening. And I would also like to say this. Don't try to act like this is one-off. Do you all not remember blackface in Spain against Lewis Hamilton? These things have been consistently happening over the course of time. So this is not a one-off. And you got to understand, I combat this all the time on a YouTube channel as a black content creator. I get this weekly. I go on my hell comments. It's guaranteed I can go in there today and see the N-word, or see that I'm black and I only need to watch NASCAR and that I don't know what I'm talking about and I'm ghetto.
They don't even want you watching NASCAR.
Well, yeah, and I'm like,
they're trying to kick you out of NASCAR
have
too.
You seen what's going on in NASCAR? You want me to
I
go
have
there?
seen. I have seen. We're talking about Raja. Some stuff is going on with him. My goodness. I mean, but look. Just to give a bit more flavor to this. And again, it's not everybody,
right? But
it's a non-zero group of people. I can tell you, someone called me an ape.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks back, not because of anything they knew about me, but because they disagreed with me about something and discovered that I was black. like it's so open that it's like, what are we doing here?
What are we?
What are we actually doing here? So I do think it's important to highlight attention to this, whether the attacks are to racial minorities, sexual orientation minorities, right, gender minorities, whatever. Pushback is real. It's going to happen, but it's also important to say, listen, this is not okay. It's been said, if you don't say, what your frustrations are, what your pains are, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. So you have to speak up about it, and it's not acceptable. Things are happening. I just wish they would happen a little faster.
Right. And I'm going to say, Matt Bishop, other people out there that are going through this similar thing. Listen, you do have people like Bryson, like myself, that are people that support you being you and contributing to the sport, period. Like, it takes a diverse and mixed community to have a great community with different perspectives, different walks of life, different lifestyles, and we can all have something that we unify and enjoy and talk about it without being like we have to be lynched or stoned to death for personal decisions that we choose to do in our life, whether who I choose to partner with, whether who I choose to be friends with, whether who I choose to marry. None of that, it should be an indictment to cast hate up on somebody to the point where they literally feel like they have to leave a society or an organization or a social media page just to feel like it's too much for me. That's crazy. Y'all got to cut that shit out. You do. You just got to cut it out.
Yeah. And just to be clear, part of that burden has to lie with the people who actually run the social media sites.
Thank you.
Clearly,
big fact.
It's no longer enough to say, well, just block these people. It's like, well, if I block them, that just makes them free to pester other people.
There you go.
The problem isn't me. The problem isn't us. I mean, I have problems. I have problems, but it's not this.
There you go.
Right? If someone calls me an ape, I'm not the problem. Right? They are the problem, and they are the ones who need to actually have something be done to them. So
True.
We'll get into this. I just want to be clear that the burden can't lie entirely with people who are being targeted. It needs to lie with the people who run these social media pages that facilitate this kind of interaction. And they do it for the silliest reasons ever. Clicks.
They do.
It's silly.
They do. Man, well, Bryson, man, as always, brother, man, I really appreciate you stopping back. You Wolfpack fam, you know that. So listen, now it's official. Like, you tell these people where they can come see you. You established now. Bryson's turning up in the community. He getting big shout outs. Spotify numbers is going to the roof. Tell these people where they can come see you and get more of Bryson Sullivan.
I mean, I'm mostly on Twitter, but because, Elon's antics have given a lot of us a bit of a scare, I'm on Instagram now more. I'm on Instagram now more at Natural Paradigm as well. We do have the Tech Heads F1 podcast, which I run with Dr. Obbs and Molly Oxner. And I've never really viewed that podcast as the avenue to be a content creator. What it really is an educational podcast. It's designed to help bridge the gap between some of the more abstruse, esoteric elements of technical detail in Formula One to everyday people so they can kind of get into it. And it's also a means by which to have conversations that I'm not normally having, right, and then to document them for posterity. So someone wants to ask, why does McLaren's wheel guns have LEDs as lights on it now? They can go back and listen to the podcast and figure out how that was actually helping them this year. So cool. Those are my main areas, Twitter and Instagram and the Tech Heads F1 podcast. I will be doing a few other things in the upcoming year that I can't really talk about publicly yet. But they should be interesting and they should be fun as always.
All right, man. And listen, y'all know the goodie. Bryson will be back sometime in the future. He has a lot of responsibilities, but like I said, you don't have to wait for him to come back here. You can go see Bryson at his home, in his house, and kick it with him over there at the Tech Heads Podcast. All right, Instagram and Twitter. And like I always say, y'all be safe. Peace. Just build it. Thanks for watching another episode of Wolfpack Performance. Don't forget to check out some of my other content on Formula One and motorsports topics. Like, share, subscribe, and we go live on the weekends. See you soon.